In 1960, the second term of President Eisenhower comes to an end. Wanted a successor. Two candidates are competing against each other, and both will go down in history. Richard M. Nixon, Republican Party, is already the vice president. John F. Kennedy, Democratic Party, is an unknown senator. But he has a rich father, and his siblings form a powerful election campaign organization.
Kennedy constituted change and Nixon constituted continuity, and in that election, Kennedy had a very young and very attractive wife in Jacqueline Kennedy, a young family, and it caught a spirit in the early 1960s that America was moving in a different direction or moving forward or going into a different period.
In 1960, when Kennedy competes against Nixon, around 90% of American households already have a television set. This new medium shapes the election campaigns. Politics enter the living room, and so do campaign commercials. Commercials should do one thing above all: hammering the name of the candidate into the viewers' heads.
Kennedy and his wife have a 2-year-old daughter, Caroline, and Mrs. Kennedy is currently expecting the birth of a second child.
Kennedy is the first candidate who has his family appear before the camera. Television revolutionized election campaigning. The debate between the two candidates, broadcast live, reaches 70 million viewers. Nothing like this had happened ever before in history.
The candidates need no introduction. The Republican candidate, Vice President Richard M. Nixon, and the Democratic candidate, Senator John F. Kennedy. According to rules set by
the age of television quite clearly began in 1960 with the first televised debates between Nixon and Kennedy.
We find that the prices you pay went up 5 times as much in the Truman administration as they did in the Eisenhower administration.
Nixon is doing well, but in front of the TV camera, it's not his prepared speech that turns out to be crucial, probably more to his own surprise than to anybody else's.
Both campaigns had worked aggressively to try to control the temperature. The last person who set the temperature was someone in the Kennedy campaign. Nixon had a perspiration problem. So under the hot lights of television, manipulated by the Kennedy campaign, which increased the temperature of the room, Nixon was sweating throughout the debate, playing into the stereotype that he was somehow guilty.
John F. Kennedy would never have been elected president if it hadn't been for that presidential debate, and if Nixon had just not perspired. I mean, that's how simplistic it gets. The candidate who comes over in personality terms as warm, friendly, or smart, or whatever, just in the body language, can affect the outcome of an election, and that is just the reality of life.
Washington has got a new president. The TV debate makes the winner. John F. Kennedy is the first president of the media age and one of the youngest presidents in American history. Richard Nixon, the man who ran in vain against the unknown Kennedy 8 years ago. Vice President Hubert Humphrey is the Democratic candidate. He started late in the race for the presidency. Nixon's advisors ensure that he only appears in controllable situations, so no debate live on television is held against Humphrey. Public discussions are staged for Nixon instead, so-called town hall meetings.
Richard Nixon held a number of town hall meetings, and there would be a panel, a housewife, a plumber, a doctor, an African-American taxi driver, and we in the media kept looking for some manner in which the Nixon campaign had stacked the panel. In other words, were they trying to put Nixon's supporters on the panel? And we were never able to find that. And it was only after 2 or 3 of these events took place that we realized we were looking in the wrong place. What the Nixon campaign had done was to stack the audience. They brought in 400 or 500 avid Nixon supporters. The questions that the panelists asked were perfectly reasonable questions, sometimes even fairly tough questions. But the audience would respond so favorably to everything that Nixon said that it looked as though he was having a brilliant, brilliant performance.
Nixon's strategy is successful. He wins the election of 1968. After 8 years, the Republicans have won the White House again. In 1972, they want to defend it. Shortly before the crucial campaign phase begins, Nixon is writing history. As the first statesman of the West, he meets Mao Zedong, the communist dictator. A welcome side effect, Nixon is the main media topic.
You don't bring 110 reporters and technicians with you because you're trying to keep this below the horizon. He brought us all along because he wanted this thing to be covered, and covered in great detail.
So-called man-in-the-street interviews are supposed to show Nixon's popularity.
I think the president is doing a fine job and has taken his job very seriously.
You better believe it. I am going to vote for President Nixon.
America needs President Nixon, and he needs you.
I think it's done.
Hard work is required until such easy and spontaneous answers are recorded.
Tensions that we have now that we haven't had before.
Okay, I wonder if you could answer me that once again, but a little tighter, a little shorter. What do you think of President Nixon as a president? And start again, since the president's been in power.
No, wait, no, that's not.
The president said he's going to bring home the troops from
right.
Vietnam.
You better believe it. I am going to vote for President Nixon.
Thanks very much. That's great.
Nixon's popularity is rising again. His strategy seems to work. But then, something unforeseen happens. A break-in in the campaign headquarters of the Democrats in the Watergate building. The motives are initially unclear. One thing is certain. The Republican campaigners resort to criminal means. Washington Post journalists are thoroughly investigating who is behind it and on what scale they played the dirty tricks.
A whole constellation of activities, some of them technically legal, but really unconstitutional in principle, some of them illegal, that had to do with using the national security authority of the president and the Secretary of State and the national security advisor to the president for purposes that it was not intended.
In the wake of Watergate, campaign contributions are on the political agenda. There's talk about $25 million for Nixon. All begins with an unfortunate accident.
When these guys were arrested inside Democratic Party headquarters, they all had lots of $100 bills in their pockets, all sequentially numbered. And it wasn't hard for the FBI to trace this back to a campaign fund that hadn't been reported, legally reported. And campaign finance simply became a part of a bigger scandal that started out simply as what you might call political dirty tricks. The key issue was that there were things going on, the corporate contributions and the really big individual contributions from rich donors were going on, and were going on in secret.
Nixon's campaign advertising unaffectedly shows an ideal world. Eventually, he is re-elected with more than 60% of the vote. But soon after, suspicion arises that he is behind the Watergate machinations. Nixon denies everything.
We had never had a criminal president before who undermined the Constitution of the United States in the way that Nixon had.
Nixon has to resign. The vice president who succeeds him was not elected by the people, Gerald Ford. His predecessor as vice president had resigned due to allegations of corruption. Gerald Ford now follows into the Oval Office, and only 2 years later, he will have to compete in his own election campaign.
My name This is Jimmy Carter, and I'm running for president.
A largely unknown man, the governor of Georgia, runs for the Democrats.
That kind of a man, in the wake of Watergate, seemed like a breath of fresh air.
He comes wearing jeans or simple sweaters, presenting himself really as sort of the opposite of, an elite, regal Washington politician.
Carter is self-deprecating enough to play around with his peanut farmer image. The plane for his campaign trips is called Peanut One, an allusion to Air Force One, the president's plane. And he carries his bags himself, a pointed gesture. The candidates get the opportunity to confront the opponent and the voters in a TV debate for the first time since 1960. Ever since then, there hadn't been any TV debates at all.
Because the candidates were afraid of them, because they saw what had happened with Kennedy-Nixon. And so, and that could happen to anybody.
Health care that is affordable. These things can be done.
I'd say, first of all, that I think in case there's a Carter administration, the sacrifices would be much less.
Carter wins the election narrowly, but he wins it. The mood for change after the Nixon debacle is ultimately decisive.
On behalf of the Commission on Presidential Debates, I am pleased to welcome you to this first presidential debate of the 1988 campaign. I'm Jim Lara of the McNeil-Lara NewsHour. The candidates are Vice President George Bush, the Republican nominee, Governor Michael Dukakis, the Democratic nominee.
Neither one of them was a gifted candidate. But the Bush campaign had a better team working for them.
Initially, George Bush relied on feel-good advertising, as if it were a diaper brand. He builds up an image as a benevolent father figure. Michael Dukakis, the Democratic Party candidate, is governor of Massachusetts. He's considered quite successful.
Dukakis was a sound fellow, a sort of competent fellow, but not very dynamic, and he did not project much of a vision. Neither did George Bush.
Dukakis was ahead in the polls until the Bush campaign began airing ads.
As a candidate, Michael Dukakis called Boston Harbor an open sewer. As governor, he had the opportunity to do something about it, but chose not to. The Environmental Protection Agency called his lack of action the most expensive public policy mistake in the history of New England. Now, Boston Harbor, the dirtiest harbor in America, will cost residents $6 billion to clean.
As it turns out, some scenes for this TV commercial were filmed somewhere else. The forgery is soon apparent. But Dukakis doesn't strike back immediately. His response is differentiated and too slow. Thus, it has no effect.
It is the first year in which we have conclusive evidence that advertising moves votes, when the other side doesn't respond at the same level to the ads. The Dukakis campaign didn't believe these ads could possibly work, and by the time they realized that they were, it was too late to counteract them.
The crime issue was especially tough. The crime rate was still quite high by the late 1980s. It was a big problem in a lot of American cities. People no longer felt they could walk the streets at night.
Bush and Dukakis on crime. Bush supports the death penalty for first-degree murderers. Dukakis not only opposes the death penalty, he allowed first-degree murderers to have weekend passes from prison. One was Willie Horton, who murdered a boy in a robbery, stabbing him 19 times. Despite a life sentence, Horton received 10 weekend passes from prison. Horton fled, kidnapped a young couple, stabbing the man and repeatedly raping his girlfriend. Weekend prison passes. Dukakis on crime.
Despite the aggressive commercials, there is no scandal during the TV debate. Bush already sees himself as the winner, but Dukakis is also convinced that he himself is right.
And the best America is not behind us. The best America is yet to come.
My fellow Americans, I am that man, and I ask for your support. Thank you very much.
George Bush wins the election, but with just over 50%, The turnout is the lowest in over 60 years. Political disenchantment is rising. George Bush, the incumbent president, has enormous approval ratings 1 year before the election. Yet,
the public's focus had shifted from foreign policy, where they had given Bush good marks, to domestic policy and to an economy that was now sputtering. And Bush, as a kind of well-to-do, elite New England Republican, he didn't seem to have a feeling for what ordinary people were going through in the recession.
His opponent, Bill Clinton, governor of insignificant state Arkansas. At 46, he's one of the youngest presidential candidates in history, almost as young as John F. Kennedy.
Bill Clinton, who came from a humble background, who was coming out of Arkansas, a state that had a lot of troubles when he took over as governor there, Clinton seemed to get it. Clinton seemed to understand people's economic distress.
Clinton's campaign team is applying the latest methods, but the work is extremely tiring.
I must have worked easily 6.5 days out of 7 every week for about a year that I worked on that campaign. I've never worked as hard on that in my entire life as I have on political campaigns. The commitment is complete.
I was born in a little town called Hope, Arkansas, 3 months after my father died. It was a wonderful little small town where, it seemed that everybody knew everybody else.
Some people think that Bill must have been born wealthy and raised wealthy, that he had all of the privileges that you could ever imagine. Well, instead of being born with a silver spoon in his mouth, he was really born into a house that had an outhouse in the backyard.
Talk shows are becoming more popular. Besides the usual TV debates, there is a new format now in which ordinary citizens are allowed to interview the candidates. This year, there are 3: Ross Perot, George Bush, and Bill Clinton. A really incidental moment becomes an issue that everyone will remember.
George Bush looking at his watch. It was almost as though, you could interpret it one of several ways. I'm getting a little bored with this, or how much longer do I have to keep up this facade before this damn thing is over?
He hated debates. He said to me, if I had my way, there would be no presidential debates, because it's all about showbiz. It's all about these things. By the guy looked at his watch, oh, he did that, that's not how you should decide who's going to be president of the United States.
Bill Clinton plays the saxophone. Music is a way to reach young people. However, for this, he needs to appear in shows that are usually shunned by politicians.
Clinton appeared in cooking shows and who knows where else. The main thing was that people could see him. From then on, which was pretty much from '92, this became a principle in all campaigns.
Clinton's family life plays a special part in this campaign, for there are problems.
In the run-up to the '92 campaign, Clinton's reputation from Arkansas as a womanizer was well known, and it was talked about.
So when these accusations were brought to light, in December of '91, in January of 1992, there was certainly no shortage of us thinking, okay, well, I'm going to be out of a job, pretty soon, and feeling pretty low about that.
Hillary Clinton performed valiantly in a famous interview on the program 60 Minutes, and basically said, he's my guy, and he's reformed, and we're fine, our marriage is fine.
She was very supportive of her husband. She faced it all. I don't know. I wouldn't like to have been in his shoes in the evening at home. But for the public, it looked very good.
President Bush's election campaign is falling behind. Another president of the United States is in danger of being elected out of office.
One of his aides said, we were tired. The advisors were tired. The president was tired. We ran a rather tired campaign.
The underdog, Bill Clinton, with Hillary at his side, becomes the winner of the election of 1992 through a perfectly orchestrated campaign. His recipe: one campaign, one topic, the economy, stupid. While the political Washington is marked for a presidential Democrat again, rumors arise about continuing women's stories of the smart Southerner Clinton. But then, the Republicans, Clinton's opponents, use a new weapon. A special prosecutor investigates Clinton's affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky. In 1998, the Republicans even try to impeach Clinton. This is already the prelude to the next election campaign. A young politician from Illinois, even without an office on the national level, steps up for the Democrats, Barack Obama. As it has been common since Kennedy, his wife and children are always present.
Our journey may be long, our work will be great, but we know in our hearts we are ready for change. We are ready to come together, and in this election, we are ready to believe again. Thank you.
Some listeners are reminded of the African American church by Obama's cadences during the election campaign. The Republican contender John McCain from Arizona, senator like Obama, but already in office for more than 20 years. Neither candidate has previously gained experience as president or vice president.
McCain was an older candidate who had been injured as a result of torture and a plane crash while he was serving as a pilot in Vietnam. And so McCain walks somewhat awkwardly and doesn't have complete use of one of his arms. What the Obama campaign did to stress his age was slowed the visuals down to make him look as if he was not really competent.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. A slogan that puts his mark on the whole election campaign.
We are in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression.
You know, the stock market had crashed. We were sitting on the edge of another Great Depression. And into that steps a candidate who is assuring the country that it is great, that it has the capacity to overcome, that we are going to get past this terribly traumatic moment. It's a message the country needed to hear.
Obama gathers enthusiastic young helpers together who are able to master the latest media technology. Through data analytics and data mining, they collect as much information on potential voters as they can. Obama's website is the centerpiece of his campaign. If you opt out of public campaign funding, your expenditures are not limited by law. Obama uses this. The key to his success is the button at the top right. Donate now. Obama collects more than $650 million, including $500 million from the internet, and most of it in small amounts. McCain, in contrast, collects a total of just over $200 million.
Does money matter? Yes. If both sides are comparable in the quality of their messaging, the candidate with more money will win.
In addition to traditional advertising, Obama's money is used especially for targeting small groups of voters. So Obama makes his way into the White House. He makes use of all possibilities of his era. But the basic problem of privately financed election campaigns remains.
You simply inevitably have a highly disproportionate share of the money coming from a very thin stratum of very rich people. And that's not democratic.
A presidential campaign in this country today is a billion-dollar operation that starts from nothing. It starts from scratch, and in a matter of 18 months to 2 years has become a billion-dollar corporation.
The methods have changed. The goal remains. Many candidates compete, but in the end, only one moves into the White House. The last two remaining in the race fight with the gloves off. Voters are wooed and influenced, they are pried, and sometimes manipulated. These campaign methods are copied all over the world. The effort that the campaigners make has increased immensely, but the result isn't really predictable. No one is safe from surprises, because in the end, only the voters decide.